Good evening and welcome to Behind Headlines, and in this program tonight we shall be telling the remarkable and inspirational story of the Ethiopian Jews, better known as Better Israel community, who made Aliyah to Israel over 40 years ago. 40 years ago in Ethiopia, a civil war tore the country apart and the Jewish community walked hundreds of miles through Sudan in order to be rescued in a daring Mossad operation known as Operation Moses. So we'll be looking back at this remarkable story of fulfillment of biblical prophecy as it relates to the Ethiopian Jewish community. And today I'm joined by my co-host and good friend Robin Benson. Robin, it's great to see you on Behind Headlines.
Thank you, Simon. Good to be back again.
And just share your thoughts a little bit on this remarkable story, because we really are seeing, aren't we, the hand of history move as in relation to God's plans and purposes, but this time focusing on the plight of the Ethiopian Jews who made Aliyah under the most extreme and difficult conditions over 40 years ago, back in 84 and 85.
Yeah, I think probably a lot of Christians, a lot of believers may not even be aware of this story unless they're more actively involved in supporting Aliyah from on a worldwide basis. They're probably unaware of what the Mossad got up to back in the the mid-80s, the mid to late 80s, in getting thousands of Jewish people out of Sudan and then also later on out of Ethiopia itself in just unbelievable daring circumstances, things that when you look back on it, you think, yeah, only Israel, only the Jewish people would come up with this sort of way of solving this major people problem, and getting those who had at last been recognized by the rabbinate in the late 70s as actually one of the lost tribes, to use the expression, and therefore okay to bring them to the land of Israel.
Absolutely. And what's so inspirational about this story, it's very Bond-esque. This could be something like out of a Bond film, the way that the Israelis carry out their special operations. But this had extra meaning because this was about bringing the Jewish people back from Ethiopia. So just a reminder that back in 84 and then 85, the Mossad executed a daring covert operation that rescued 8,000 Ethiopians from war and from famine. And thousands of these individuals walked hundreds of miles through hostile territories into Sudan before being rescued by Israel. Jewish Ethiopians claim a different origin story. So many of them say that they are descendants from the lost tribe of Dan, which the Assyrians exiled before the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians. Others think they are Yemenite or Egyptian Jews. Others say that they are descendants from the Israelites who accompanied King Solomon's son and the Queen of Sheba back to Ethiopia. While the origins of the Ethiopian Jews remain unclear, their courage, their faith, and their love for the Jewish homelands remain strong and passionate. So we also see that there was an excellent film called The Red Sea Spies that tells the story of Israel's Mossad operation called the Red Sea Resort, in which tells the daring story of how Israeli Mossad operatives used a Dead Sea resort with real tourists as a cover in order to bring the Ethiopian Jews home to Israel. And recently there was also a special service at Mount Herzog to actually mark those who died in this operation called Operation Moses, in which Israel did everything they could to bring the Jews of Ethiopia home. And it is truly, and also today, aren't there, that Ethiopian Jews contribute so much to Israeli society, and many of them are serving in the top echelons of the Israeli Defense Force.
It's true. I mean, there's a recognition that the first generation, those who came as part of Operation Moses and the successive ones, Joseph, Solomon, I think there was David as well. There were several major, Solomon was actually the biggest, but we're not covering that today. But that first generation found it really difficult to settle into Israel because they were subsistence farmers. I mean, some people have, I'm not sure that it's an accurate description, but some observers have said that they were really like it was a group emerging out of the Stone Age in many respects. And therefore, to be confronted with 20th and 21st century Israel was such a shock to their system. And of course, they didn't have the language, they didn't have the education, most of them were farmers. And so it's the second generation, it's those who actually came as children or who've been born in Israel since this happened. They're the ones that are really making an impact on Israeli society. I mean, you've got, I don't know whether she's still, but there was one Ethiopian lady was a minister in a previous government in charge of immigration. And do you remember the bus incident a few months back where buses were being, people were finding bombs on buses, and there was one in particular where a passenger found the bomb, told the bus driver, he got into a car park space, got everybody off, and then the bus exploded.
Yes, remember.
But the person who found the bomb was a young Ethiopian woman. So, I mean, and yes, you're right, they're involved in high tech, they're involved in medical, they're involved in the military. They are fully integrated, that second, third generation into Israeli society. But the parents really struggled. And many of them, I think we need to be honest, many of them faced, opposition and suspicion from other Israelis who just probably had never come across black Jews. And there was a racism element into it. But that, thankfully, is disappearing, it's dissipating as the decades go on.
No, absolutely. So anyone who can classify Israel as a racist entity only need to look at the history of the Ethiopian Jews to realise that's not the case. Yeah. Well, let's go to a scripture, because it's incredible to think that we are marking the 40th anniversary of Operation Moses that helped bring over 8,000 Ethiopian Jews, known as Better Israel, back to Israel. So let's kick off with a scripture. This one is from Isaiah chapter 43. Verses 5 and 6 says, "Fear not, for I am with you. I will bring your descendants from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give them up, and to the south, bring my sons from afar and my daughters from the ends of the earth." Now, considering that this was written in the time before and around the destruction of the first temple in ancient Israel by the Babylonians, and knowing that scripture is thousands of years old, and yet over the past 40 years, this scripture has been fulfilled, and particularly reference to the south, where the Ethiopian Jewish community, or Better Israel, has made Aliyah to Israel. Isn't this exciting for students of Bible prophecy to see the hand of God on history?
Of course it is. I mean, you're talking about 2,500 years of history from the point where God gives this word to Jeremiah, and probably more than 2,500, because if it's pre the destruction of the first temple, that's 586 or thereabouts BC. So here we are over 2,000 years, 2,500 years later, and you and I, okay, we weren't around when this, no, we were around. I was around when this happened, although I wasn't aware of it at the time. So we are around, we're part of the generation that have seen this scripture come alive in a way that our forebears only dreamt of and prayed into. And it's still happening. They're still bringing in dribs and drabs the remaining portions of the Jewish community that are still stuck in Ethiopia. So it's an ongoing process that the Israeli government sort of struggles with, makes some progress, and then it regresses, and then it makes some more progress, and then it regresses again. But the way this was done in the late 80s was just mind-blowing. Thousands, literally thousands, brought to the land of Israel.
I think I was 10 when, for example, our TV screens and news screens were full of the news on the horrendous famine that was taking place in Ethiopia because of the war. And of course, also remember the kind of Band-Aid song, "Do They Know It's Christmas?" That was the Christmas #1 then, because the school that I was in had a little radio, which was very good, and a little radio station. And I think that's where I got my first real interest for kind of broadcasting from there. And they played a lot of that song through each of the classes, "Do They Know It's Christmas?" And of course, what I didn't know at the time was how God was going to use the famine in Ethiopia to actually bring his people, the Better Israel, home in fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
Well, the famine was real. I mean, I remember the TV pictures. I mean, it was horrific. I mean, I remember, news reporters just speechless. They couldn't find words to describe what they were seeing. But of course, we need to remember too that Ethiopia was under a communist regime, Mengistu, who was awful. I mean, he persecuted the Christians, the various groupings within the Ethiopian church, both the Orthodox and what we would call probably the independent evangelicals, if you want to put a label on them. So the Jewish people weren't the only ones who were getting hammered by this communist, dreadful communist regime. And then comes the famine, and that's what precipitates the movement of the Jewish people out of the land on foot, hundreds of miles on foot. You know, many of them lost their lives trying to trek to Sudan because they had something had already been set up that led them to believe if they could get to Sudan, then there was a way to get to Israel. At least that was in their thinking. Yeah. But they were just desperate to get out of Ethiopia.
And I think we also need to give Israel's prime minister back then, Menachem Begin, a huge amount of credit, because he, for the first time, Likud had taken power, beaten the traditional kind of Labour Party. So it's the first time we saw a centre-right coalition government in Israeli history. And he saw the kind of vision behind Better Israel to bring them back home to Israel. And he was personally moved by this story and did everything he could to mobilize the whole institutions of state, including the Mossad, including the IDF and others, to actually bring these precious Jewish people home back to Israel after thousands of years.
Well, I mean, he was a refugee himself, so he understood what it meant to be a Holocaust survivor and a Holocaust refugee. Yeah, and it completely, him and his government completely changed their attitude towards Aliyah, I think generally, but in particular when it comes to the Ethiopian Jews. And you're right, he effectively told the Mossad, do it. Find out some way of getting these people home, but do it. You know, I mean, it's really politics being what it is. I'm sure there were some that rankled at the order, but they went ahead, and of course the story unfolded. It's just, as I say, it's mind-boggling what
Absolutely.
They got up to.
So let's learn something a little bit more about Better Israel, which is the Jewish community in Ethiopia, and this is thanks to the Virtual Jewish Library. Now they quote this following quote. They say, once they were kings, 500,000 strong. They matched their faith with fervor and outmatched the Muslim and Christian tribesmen around to rule in the mountain highlands around Lake Tana. They called themselves Better Israel, the house of Israel, and used the Torah to guide their prayers and memories of the heights of Jerusalem. And they lived in their thatched huts in Ethiopia. But their neighbors called them the Falashas, the alien ones, the invaders. And even 300 years of rule, even these black features that matched those of all the people around them, did not make the Jews of Ethiopia secure governors of their own destinies in Africa. For centuries, most of the world was unaware that a community of black Jews existed in Ethiopia. After their contacts had been made between European Jews and later Israeli Jews, knowledge of the Ethiopian Jews was scant. It was not until the early 1980s and the famine in North Africa that drove many Jews to seek an escape route to Sudan that Better Israel became widely known. At the same time, the Ethiopian Jews were equally unaware that Jews lived anywhere else and were at least as shocked to learn of the existence of white Jews as the Europeans were to discover black Jews. Now also then goes on to talk about how they were actually found. So the discovery of black Jews is a fascinating story. There's a lot of speculation that this is the lost tribe of Dan in terms of the 12 tribes of Israel. But the Virtual Jewish Library quotes the following. They said the first modern contact with Better Israel occurred in 1769 when a Scottish explorer, James Bruce, stumbled upon them while searching for the source of the River Nile. He found them impoverished, heavily taxed and oppressed. He estimated at the time placed their population at around 100,000. He said a Jew who converted to Christianity, Henry Stern, offered a detailed description of the condition of Ethiopian Jews in the middle of the 19th century. His views were largely coloured by the objective of covering the Jews that he found as a representative for the London Society for Promoting Christianity Amongst the Jews, which is CMJ today. He said that he found that they had a rigid notions of the sanctity of the Sabbath, who told him, and they believed that Jerusalem would be rebuilt again. Stern described the Jews as exemplary in their morals, cleanliness in their habits, and devout in their belief. Still, he became convinced that a number of the Falashas are fully persuaded of the truth of the gospel and anxious to be baptized. Now, there's an interesting story here. I want to read this one. So, interest in the Ethiopian Jews grew. The European Jewish philanthropist organization, Alliance Israel Universitar, was asked to intervene and send an emissary to contact Better Israel in 1867. Joseph Halevi was dispatched and became the first outside Jew to visit the Better Israel. Ironically, when Halevi reached the Jews in Ethiopia, they did not want to have anything to do with him. They did not believe that he could be Jewish and feared he was a missionary trying to trick them. And I just want to quote from this, because this is absolutely, this is like gold dust. It's incredible. He says, I wanted to assure them that all the Falashas of Jerusalem and in other parts of the world were white, and that they could not be distinguished from the other inhabitants of their respective countries. The name of Jerusalem, which I had accidentally mentioned, changed as if by magic the attitude of most of these people. A burning curiosity seemed at once to have seized the whole company. Oh, do you come from Jerusalem, the blessed city? Have you beheld with your own eyes Mount Zion and the house of the Lord of Israel, the holy temple? Are you also acquainted with the bearing lace of our mother Rachel, with glorious Bethlehem? They were never weary of asking me questions of this nature, and they eagerly listened to my replies. I must confess I was deeply moved on seeing those black faces light up at the memory of our glorious history. So isn't it astonishing that here we see a Jewish philanthropist, an explorer, discover Better Israel, and then they still believe that the Second Temple is still in Jerusalem. And that the nation of Israel is still in existence. I just find that story extraordinary.
Yeah, I mean, it is amazing. And this group, even to this day, are almost more Torah observant than many religious Jews who live in Israel, because they've not been pressurized from the outside. They have been Torah observant all of these centuries that they've been living in Ethiopia. And you're right, they expected the temple still to be in existence. In fact, I've read somewhere in one of the articles that I read that they never talked about the land of Israel, they talked about the land of Jerusalem. Everything was Jerusalem-centric. So that's right. As soon as this guy spoke about Jerusalem, people who were totally ignored him all of a sudden just lit up and were pestering him with question after question after question, because that was the key point of contact in their spiritual understanding with their ancestors, Jerusalem. Yeah.
And the report goes on to say that Halevi, in his return, appealed to the Alliance and the rest of world Jewry to aid Ethiopian Jews. The Alliance did not consider Halevi's reports reliable and decided not to help the 150,000 to 200,000 Jews Halevi estimated to be in Ethiopia. Now, if we move on a little bit until kind of 1948, by 1948, the State of Israel established, but the Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia denied Better Israelis permission to leave. Selassie was ousted in a coup in 1974, which an estimated 2,500 Jews were killed and 7,000 became homeless. In 1977, a covert arms deal was made between Ethiopia's new communist government and Israel, allowing Ethiopian Jews to emigrate under the radar. But in February 1978, Israel's then Foreign Minister, Moshe Dayan, broke the pact by speaking publicly about it. The Ethiopian government, in response, halted the exodus and targeted Ethiopian Jewish activists involved, and one of them was Farideh Alakim, who fled to Sudan, and thus the story of the Red Sea diving result began. And again, there is, my friend Rafi Berg has written a brilliant book called The Red Sea Spies. He was on the Middle East Port a few years ago when the book came out. And of course, we see that Netflix have actually covered this, called the Red Sea diving resort. Share with us the exciting and incredible audacity of the Mossad to actually bring better Israel home.
Okay, I watched the film last night because I thought, okay, I need to try and get my head around the bits and pieces of this story. I mean, I have to, let's be honest and say that the film takes a lot of liberties with the story, okay? But it still gives you the guts of what this small team of Mossad agents, sort of multinational team did through a holding company in Europe, were able to reach an agreement with the Ethiopian government of the time.
Sudan government, wasn't it?
Sorry, the Sudanese government of the time, thank you for straightening that out, to lease this, what had been an Italian diving resort that had sort of fallen into disrepair because the Italians gave up on it, right on the Red Sea coast. And, you know, money was paid, and these guys then went there and got this thing going again. And I think that's one of the disappointing aspects of the film, is that it doesn't actually show how successful the diving resort became.
They made a profit.
Yeah, well, yes, it didn't cost Mossad anything. I mean, they had government employees coming, they had military coming, they had British SAS coming. They had all sorts of foreign groups coming and using this facility to practice their diving and also just to relax because it was a beautiful spot. I mean, but it was a complete facade, because behind the scenes, the male members of the team were actually going out at night with trucks picking up Jewish refugees from an awful refugee camp in Sudan, and getting them to the place where then IDF special forces and these Zodiac, dinghies could come to the shore and take them out to an Israeli ship that was posing, I think, as some sort of oil maintenance ship. Put them on board and take them up the Red Sea to Eilat. I mean, it's just unbelievable, the audacity of it.
And also the kind of amazing thing about this fake Red Sea resort, that it did attract real tourists.
Yeah.
And the context of this one is that Sudan considered Israel an enemy state because it was a Muslim country.
Yes.
So to actually have a Mossad operation in Sudan, knowing that the Sudan would have been linked with the Arab world, and its hostility towards Israel, but really this was the only access to the sea from Ethiopia that these better Israel community could escape, which was absolutely extraordinary. So it says here that when the diving resort cover was blown, Ethiopian Jews who were waiting in Sudan refugee camp were stranded for months, but about 5,000 died of starvation and disease. But they reckon that 8,000 better Israel or Ethiopian Jews make Aliyah to Israel through Operation Moses, and this was this Mossad operation. Now there is a good story covered by this one called Digital Spy, under their headline, Red Sea, a diving resort is only part of a much darker true story. So he said the Netflix new thriller, The Red Sea Diving Resort, is based upon the recently declassified Mossad mission to help thousands of Ethiopian Jewish refugees escape persecution via a fake resort on the coast of Sudan. The movie was directed by Gideon Raff from Homeland, left out quite a lot of truth, both literal and emotional, from the Hollywood version. So again, it's how the Israeli Prime Minister then, Menachem Begin, sent a message to a Mossad agent called Dami Lamor, his real name is Ari, to retrieve a guy called Farid. Now Farid was actually one of these Ethiopian Jewish refugee camps, and helping the Jewish community there protect itself from raiders and thieves, and also from the government of Sudan and their troops. And then he wanted to get wind of saying there must be a way of actually rescuing. So they joined an incredible partnership where they actually rescued Better Israel. Amazing.
It is amazing. And I think there are probably a good proportion of that film that gives us a sense of the relationship between the Ari character and Farade is real. You know, we get a sense of how they work together, and then how Ari built his team and drew them in, brought them in with different specialities, and started to work together, you know, with this aim of getting these Jewish refugees home to their homeland. Yeah.
And also, I think we have to also look at the personal risks taken by these Mossad operatives, because had they been caught during that time, no doubt they would have been killed, hung, or brutally tortured if they were caught by the government of Sudan. But even for example, Ari, who's the kind of main character, and he's the Mossad character in the Red Sea Spy, is the fact that and I heard him speaking personally at the book launch of Rafi Berg's book, The Red Sea Spies, and he shared the remarkable story that he said he didn't really believe in God, but when he was involved in this operation, him, the Jewish agency, the IDF, the Mossad, the Prime Minister's office, all felt that there was something absolutely supernatural happening with the helping of over 8,000 Jews from Ethiopia make Aliyah to Israel in fulfillment of biblical prophecy.
Yeah. There's a quote that I came across, I don't know, in a couple of the articles, and it's the Ari character, who's Danny, talking about Farade and the relationship that there was between the two of them. If you don't mind me reading it out.
No, that'd be great.
It was like, Danny says it was like two big wheels which met. One was the old Ethiopian Jews' dream to go back to Jerusalem, and the other was the Israeli Jews that came to help them fulfill this. It was the fusion of wheels that was the strength of this operation. That is why nobody ever gave up.
Yeah. And also I think we have to acknowledge the tenacity and the determination on behalf of the Better Israel community, escaping war-torn Ethiopia, walking hundreds of miles with hardly any food or any water, and their one big massive desire was to get back to Jerusalem. But they were probably thinking biblical Jerusalem. Yes. They weren't thinking Jerusalem in the late 1970s or mid to
It was definitely a shock 80s. To them whenever they arrived, whether they came in their later planes or whether they came off the boat, they were completely shocked to see 70s, 80s Jerusalem, Israel, even as it was then, you know, so yeah. Yeah, and one of the other things that, again, that I gleaned just from reading some of the material in preparation for this is that sometimes commentators portray the Ethiopian Jews as a bunch of helpless people who didn't know what to do with themselves, and yet, as you said, they trekked hundreds of miles from Ethiopia to get to Sudan in the hope of getting to Israel. So they were proactive in placing themselves somewhere where the Israelis then could come alongside them and actually help them make that 2,500-year-old desire become a reality. I mean, that again is just, I mean, that just sends a shiver up and down my spine to think about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the Mossad operative who headed up this covert mission to bring the Jews of Ethiopia home, later on actually recounted a time when their cover was nearly blown by the guests. A Canadian tourist recognized them as Israelis but kept him to himself, and the hotel was so successful even turned a profit. Well, I think he probably realized that these are Israelis. They are a long way from Israel. There must be something going on here. I value my life, so I'm going to keep my mouth shut. And we're glad he did, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. Also, we see that, for example, the Operation Moses lifted more than 7,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel from the Sudan via Brussels between November of 1984 and January of 1985. Operation Solomon later brought 14,000 Jews from Ethiopia in an airlift in May of 1991. So let's unpack, I think important for our viewers, to unpack Operation Moses that started in 1984. So the World Jewish Congress writes under the following headline: "This week in Jewish history, Operation Moses. Israel airlifts thousands of Ethiopian Jews to safety." On 18th of November 1984, the State of Israel launched Operation Moses, a 7-week covert operation airlifting thousands of Ethiopian Jews in refugee camps to safety in Israel. Whilst the Jewish community in Ethiopia has a rich Jewish history dating back well over 2,000 years. By the mid-1980s, the community was endangered by the ongoing Ethiopian civil war and widespread famine. Just share with us the kind of situation here. And again, we had the covert operation known as the Red Sea Spies. Now we have Operation Solomon, and this was the big airlift to airlift thousands of Ethiopian Jews. Sudan.
Yes, 30 flights, one after another, coming into Ethiopia. I mean, this was done with the collusion. Well, it was done with the help of the Americans, and it was done with the collusion of the Sudanese secret state agency,
who they believe were being bribed.
Yes, but they were almost an autonomous unit that weren't necessarily under the full control of the Sudanese government. So they, for whatever reason, decided to turn a blind eye to this. And these aircraft, I mean, there are stories of Boeing 747s with the seats stripped out. One was packed with over 1,000 people. Women gave birth to children on flight, in air. I don't know whether this is true. I've heard this from several sources. There are stories of them actually trying to start a fire to cook something.
I've heard this as well.
On the flight. But there's another story that a personal friend of yours and mine, Roy Thurley, often tells in connection to this Operation Solomon, that there was one particular group of Ethiopian Jews who just point blank refused to get into the airline. That they were so scared because they'd never seen an aircraft before. And Roy tells the story that there's this elderly man from the tribe, I'm going to choke up, elderly man from the tribe who reminds them that in their tribal history, there is the story of them being taken to Israel in a big silver bird. And once he reminded them that, they're on board and away. I mean, again, you and I take flight for granted. These are subsistence farmers who probably have never seen a commercial airline in their life. They may have seen military aircraft because of the Civil War, but they've never seen so the whole thing is just a mind-boggling story, and yet God's providence over it all, that those 30 flights happened, one after another, ferrying, what have we got? 14,000, I think it was, 15,000 Ethiopian Jews directly to Israel, not through Belgium, straight to Israel. And it made headlines at the time, of course. So yeah, it's one of those things that really just makes you feel good inside when you understand the ins and outs of how it was carried out.
Absolutely. So let's have a look at the IDF's take on Operation Moses, 40 years ago, in which the Jewish state helped rescue better Israel community from famine, from the civil war in Ethiopia, and also in hostile Sudan, to bring them home in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Take a look. that was courtesy of our friends at the Israeli Defense Force, and of course they are very proud of their contribution in helping bring better Israel home to Israel in fulfillment of prophecy. So just an overview quickly of the Operation Moses. Thousands travelled through the deserts of Ethiopia and Sudan, where they would eventually meet Israeli officials to be airlifted to Israel. Nearly a third of Ethiopian Jews travelling to Sudan sadly died on the way. Once they arrived in Sudan, they were placed in refugee camps where they faced anti-Semitic persecution. The unprecedented mission was coordinated by the Mossad in cooperation with the Mossad and the Sudanese state security. By the time of the mission concluded, approximately 8,000 Ethiopian Jews had been brought to Israel aboard 30 flights. The ancient Jewish community in Ethiopia, called Beta Israel, known as the House of Israel, had lived in relative isolation from the rest of the Jewish world for centuries. And we also see that the operation came to a halt on the 5th of January 1985, when news of the activity was leaked to the international media. While the operation was a resounding success, over 15,000 Jews, many of whom were infants or old or infirm, were left in Ethiopia. Abu Yaakov, a Beta Israel leader, described the situation in Ethiopia as the following: those who could not flee are elderly, sick, and infants. Those least capable of defending themselves are now facing their enemies alone. Once in Israel, they became known as the orphans of circumstance, as many had families still in Ethiopia that could not make the arduous journey through the desert. Beta Israel members in Israel and Jews in North America demonstrated for years, demanding that the Israeli government save all the Jews stuck in Ethiopia. Now, if we take ourselves back 40 years, the then Israeli Prime Minister Shimon Peres made a moving speech in the Knesset, and he wrote the following: Mr. Speaker, distinguished Knesset, we, this House, and the entire people face one problem, and one central problem alone: how to carry on this string and extraordinary rescue operation and bring to a successful conclusion. And despite the difficulties and the problems, this is not a vain hope. For 2,600 years, our brothers and sisters, the land of the buzzing of wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, have been waiting to attain to this moment, this place. They have waited, and we have waited. They have arrived, and we are richer for it.
Continuing with a quote, this wonderful tribe gloriously and stubbornly upheld the banner of Jewish belief, even from the days of Moses, and certainly after the oppressive Roman rule. Neither mountain, nor sword, nor decree, nor foreign land could prevail over their Jewish devotion, their human nobility, and their Zionist hope. And we here have borne within us the ongoing, never-ending hope of the unification of our people. Neither economic difficulty, nor internal distress, nor geographical distance, nor political obstacle shall halt or postpone the rescue and immigration effort, enwrapped in ancient splendor and enveloped in secret heroism.
Shimon Peres went on to say, we have seen them prostrating themselves and kissing the soil of our land. A light shone in their eyes while tears welled up in ours. We have seen a boy carrying his father on his shoulders. We have seen a mother tying her baby to her shoulder. We have stood by enthralled. Many in the entire world have been enthralled by this historic vision. This is a moment of pride for the Jewish people. This is a moment of a spiritual gift for the state of Israel. The government of Israel has acted and will continue to act within the range of its ability and even beyond it, in order to complete the mission, which is so humane and so Jewish, until the last Ethiopian Jew reaches his homeland. With all modesty and humility, it may be said that this was one of the most daring and wonderful acts of self-redemption that our country, and not only our country, has ever known.
Stirring stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, Shimon Peres was always known to be a very good orator and a very good spokesman on behalf of Israel. But I think that reflects his speech, reflects the joy and the mood in Israel in 1985 when the Ethiopian Jewish people came home after centuries. And also what's extraordinary is that they weren't even, until the 19th century, weren't even really considered Jewish or part of the Jewish community. No one knew that they were African Jews, for example, until only fairly recently. And now they make up such a vibrant, colourful part of Israel's society and Israel's nation.
I'm not aware of this, but do you think that the actual return of the Ethiopian Jews was part of what precipitated Israel beginning to look for other groups like the B'nai Menashe in the northeast of India? There's the Kaifang Jews in China. These other hidden groups seem to come to the fore after these incidents played out, on the world stage. So it's like Israel woke up to the fact there are other Jews scattered all over the world, and we need to find them and encourage them to come home as well.
Absolutely. But I think also that God put this on the agenda of the Israeli government, because we know when we look at the book of Revelation, there are 12 tribes representing all the different tribes of Israel, the 144,000 Messianic Jewish believers. So the Lord is slowly over time revealing who are members of that tribe in fulfillment of biblical prophecy. We're yet to see that fulfilled, but I think that's for another program. But let's have a look now at this extract of a moving documentary produced by the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem that tells the story of the Ethiopian Jews known as Beta Israel making Aliyah to Israel over 40 years ago.
The Ethiopian Jewish community has a rich and unique history. The Bible indicates in Numbers 12 that the Ethiopian Jewish lineage dates back to Moses and his marriage to an Ethiopian woman. Many centuries later, in 70 AD, the Jews were exiled from the land of Israel and dispersed among the nations. Yet a dream remained deep in their hearts, the dream of next year in Jerusalem. Through faithful observance of their traditions, passed down through the generations, this dream survived, never losing its strength. The Hebrew word used to describe the Jewish return to Jerusalem is called Aliyah, meaning to ascend or go up.
ICEJ is passionate about Aliyah because it's in the Word of God. It's a part of the Christian and Jewish scripture. Days are coming, says the Lord, when you will no longer say, as the Lord lives who brought Israel out of Egypt, but you will say, as the Lord lives who brought the sons of Israel from the land of north and from all of the countries where they had been scattered, for I will restore them to their own land which I gave to their fathers. It's as if God is saying there's a bigger exodus than Moses taking the people out of Egypt. And we get to live in that day today and be a part of it.
In 1984, Ethiopian Jews faced harsh living conditions due to intense famine and a civil war in the country. Thousands began walking on foot towards the promised land. But they encountered even greater struggles along the way from starvation, lack of water, disease, and attacks by militias. More than 4,000 died in Sudan from malnutrition and disease. Those who survived were airlifted to Israel in an emergency operation that involved the Israeli army, the CIA, and Sudanese officials. Known as Operation Moses, it was the first official wave of Ethiopian Aliyah to Israel.
To be Jews in Ethiopia, really, it's not easy. Not easy. Ethiopia is a religious country. There are the Christians, there are the Jews, there are Muslims. Jews in Ethiopia is around 2,000, 3,000 years. We pass a lot of problem. And our parents teach us always, you have to be very hard. You have to be tough. You have to fall down and come up, fall down, come. That is the life. So to survive for your identity, you have to be strong, okay? The one thing that they told us is We are remain in Ethiopia is a temporary. We are not a constant here. We have to be in Jerusalem, that's all.
I actually left Ethiopia when I was 16 in 1983. During this time, Ethiopian citizens were not allowed to leave the country. We left secretly. We walked in the night and hid in the day. We walked 370 kilometers from my village until we reached Sudan. We were adults, children, babies, and women. We had a dream to reach Jerusalem. Of course, there were a lot of hardships and difficulties.
It was been very, very dangerous. The physical issue is not the issue. The issue is the psychological, you know. We are hiding our identity. We pass through different remote areas, very difficult villages, very, very obstacle issues. And we arrived to Sudan. And in Sudan, it was been the worst. To be in Sudan, a very Muslim fanatic country, to be in a refugee camp. Refugee camp in the 1980 was the worst. In one refugee camp, all the people was died with dysentery, malaria, and we ran away from that village. We go to another refugee camp. And we arrived in Sudan in the summer. Summer in Sudan, you know what does mean summer in Sudan? Very hot. Around 50 degrees centigrade. You don't have any sanitation water, nothing. We say that we have to arrive to Jerusalem. We have to be in our country.
In 1991, due to political unrest and a military uprising in Ethiopia, Israel once again launched an emergency airlift which brought 14,000 Ethiopian Jews to Israel in one weekend. This was the legendary Operation Solomon. Through Operations Moses, Joshua, and Solomon, over 20,000 Ethiopian Jews were brought to Israel. Today, there are still thousands of Ethiopian Jews waiting to immigrate to Israel, with many of them struggling in their villages and separated from their families.
And that was courtesy of our friends at the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem for that wonderful report saying how we literally, over the past 40 years, have seen the fulfillment of biblical prophecy and the Jews from Ethiopia coming home. Now, there was a major operation called Operation Solomon in 1991. So in 1991, for 36 hours, 34 El Al passenger planes with their seats removed, maximized passenger capacity, brought 14,000 refugees to Israel to reunite them with their families. The heroic evacuation was dubbed Operation Solomon. And now very recently, to mark the 40th anniversary of Operation Moses and the Ethiopian Jews coming home to Israel, there was a special event organized at Mount Herzog. And Israel recalls the 1985 covert mission that rescued 8,000 Ethiopians from war and famine, and the community exploits and achievements, but racism still abounds. That is the title of the Times of Israel article. It says thousands of Ethiopians traveled to Mount Herzog in Jerusalem to remember those who fell in the 1984 to 1985 Operation Moses, the first covert evacuation of Ethiopian Jews to Israel. Now, what's also interesting is that there's a wonderful quote, because in that ceremony was the President of Israel, Isaac Herzog, together with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. And this is what President Herzog said. Generations of Ethiopian Jews prayed and swore to return to Zion, to Jerusalem. They did not forget or lose hope during thousands of years of exile, hardship, longing and yearning. And when the opportunity came, they left their homes, their possessions, sometimes even parts of their families, and set out on a difficult and dangerous journey that took a painful and heavy toll.
And then Benjamin Netanyahu also spoke at this anniversary gathering. And to quote from him, the code word for thousands of Jews who left their cities and villages was one word that said it all: Jerusalem. This is a victory of faith, hope, and willpower. This is the victory of love for Jerusalem.
And one of those attending that special service for Ethiopian Jews at Mount Herzl was Amos. He's a resident of Netanya. Attending the ceremony, he was 18 at the time of the operation. He said, "My family traveled through the desert on foot with a large group," he recalls. "We encountered robbers on the way who beat us and took our possessions. We suffered terrible abuse along the way and challenges were severe." Another resident called Yashu, who lives in Herzliya, said, "I left in 1981 to study in England and came to Israel as a tourist. There was a small community of Ethiopians who had arrived here in the 70s from Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. They helped develop the trail that others followed into Sudan. We had it much easier than those who came later." So let's have a look now at this wonderful tribute and success of the Ethiopian Jews now 3 generations on from Operation Moses, and how this one woman has been inspired to join the Israeli Air Force.
יש לי סיפור לספר לכם. התחלתי את השירות שלי ביחידה אחרת, אבל החלום שלי תמיד היה לשרת בחיל האוויר, בגלל שחיל האוויר עזר למשפחה שלי להגשים את החלום שלה. קוראים לי אורטל היאסו, אני חיילת בחיל האוויר הישראלי. המשפחה שלי מגיעה מקהילת יהודי אתיופיה. במשך אלפי שנים, הקהילה שלנו שמרה על מסורת היהודית, על האמונה, ואף פעם לא איבדה את התקווה שיום אחד נחזור לירושלים, הבית שלנו. ב-1980 ו-1990 המצב באתיופיה נהיה יותר ויותר מסוכן. מדינת ישראל ויהודים מסביב לעולם נחלצו לעזרת הקהילה שלנו, והביאו אלפי יהודים מאתיופיה לישראל. המבצע הגדול ביותר נקרא מבצע שלמה. במבצע הזה צה"ל הטיס אלפי יהודים מאתיופיה הביתה לישראל.
נכנסנו, כולם אנשים נכנסנו עם ילדים. שובו ברספה.
במסגרת מבצע שלמה, הטייסים של חיל האוויר סייעו למשפחה שלי להגשים את החלום שלהם לחזור לציון, לירושלים. כשהתגייסתי לצה"ל בגיל 18, ידעתי שאני רוצה לשרת בטייסת הזאת בדיוק, ואני גאה להיות טכנאית בחיל האוויר, ולתקן בדיוק את אותם המטוסים שהביאו את המשפחה שלי לישראל. אמא, מאמינה שהמטוס הזה בדיוק העלה אותך לארץ?
אני לא מאמינה, באמת אני לא מאמינה.
ברוך השם, בזכות המטוס הזה, בזכות הטייסת הזאת, אתם הגעתם לפה, אני הגעתי לפה. זה זכות ענקית בשבילי להגן על הבית שלי, ארץ ישראל.
And thanks to our friends at the IDF for that particular excellent and moving video clip. Coming back to another quote from the same Yasu that Simon mentioned, this guy spoke proudly of the development of the Ethiopian community in Israel over the last 40 years, and I quote, "It's amazing. We are talking about people who came from a village far away with no education, and now we have high positions as academics, engineers, and soldiers. Children are achieving high grades in schools and going on to work in high tech. It's a miracle," and it certainly is.
Absolutely. He went on to say that many of the estimated 170,000 Ethiopians in Israel face significant economic and cultural barriers, with only a small portion living the lives that Yashu described. Many Ethiopians complain about racial discrimination and unequal opportunities for housing, employment and education. But Eli, who was brought to Israel on Operation Moses at the age of 16, said the following: "We walked for days without food or water, but with God's help, we arrived here in Israel. We were constantly progressing as a community, and we have so much to be grateful for." So in concluding, really what we see here, isn't it, with the story of the Better Israel community making Aliyah to Israel, is the hand of God on history. He wanted the Jews of Ethiopia home. He organized the whole Israeli state, the Mossad, the IDF, the Prime Minister's office, the Jewish agency, to make it all happen, but also put that longing and desire in the hearts of the Ethiopian Jews to make Aliyah and to come home to Jerusalem.
Yeah, and the fact that Israel has set aside at least part of Jerusalem Day this year to commemorate this 40th anniversary, I think indicates how much the Israeli government, even of today in the midst of this conflict, recognizes that it is very important to mark this particular anniversary because of the repercussions that it's had throughout Israeli society and into the whole area of Aliyah.
Robin, it's been an absolute pleasure recording this Behind Headlines with you. Thank you so much. I want to thank you for watching this home. We have literally, over the past 40 years, seen the fulfillment of biblical prophecy unfold in our lifetime as it relates to the Jews of Ethiopia coming home to Israel. So thank you for watching Behind the Headlines.